very excited that you've joined us for this exciting authors talk this evening. Please make yourselves comfortable. First off, I do have a couple housekeeping things to talk about, as always. In the unlikely event of a fire, please quickly and calmly make your way out down the stairs you came up, or the central lift is fire safe, so you can take that as well and exit the front of the building. Toilets are located sort of opposite us on this circle on this level. They're quite easy to find, should you need those at any point during the talk. A little timeline for this evening. Katherine will be giving a talk, and then there will be time for Q&A, pretty generous time for Q&A, so we hope you've brought the cues. And then Katherine will be signing books. The books will also be available for purchase downstairs where the till is, if you still need to buy a copy. So I realize I haven't introduced myself. My name is Emma. I'm on the ship's crew here at Discovery, which means I do a lot of the repair and maintenance work on the historic ship. She is 123 years old, so it takes a lot of work and a fair amount of money to keep her looking pretty and welcoming as a museum for the public. So if what you hear tonight moves you to donate, we have a donation station in the back. There are donation boxes downstairs as well. We also have our Adopt an Object program, which you can hear more about by asking any member of staff. And thank you very much for your donations already this evening as well. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Katherine MacInnes. Katherine will be presenting to us about her book, Snow Widows, which is about the women behind the men of Scott's Polar Party, who tragically perished on the way back from the South Pole in 1912. Katherine is an author and an artist. She is a member of the Society of Authors and the Biographers Club. In addition to Snow Widows, which was shortlisted for the Biographers Prize in an early form, she is also the author of a biography on Oriana Wilson called Woman with the Iceberg Eyes. You'll be hearing a lot more about Oriana in this talk, as well as 4 other incredible women. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Katherine MacInnes.
Hello everybody, thank you very much for coming. I'm not sure if I can take that off. I'll try and just talk to it like this. So this book is giving you a new angle on a very famous story. And when I started doing this, I used to think that it was the unofficial story. Now I think it's possibly the real story of what happened, because the men wrote letters to the 5 women who I'm going to introduce you to, which was not the official story. If Captain Scott had seen what was in those letters, if he had known what the 5 women I'm going to introduce you to knew, he wouldn't have taken those same men to the South Pole, and the story would be entirely different. And that's not over-making the point. One of those people would have been court-martialed rather than invited to go to the South Pole. So I'm going to start with this. I use this image with respect. You all, I'm sure, know this image. It was taken at the South Pole, and these men never saw it. Because it was developed posthumously. It was found in the camera, which was found in the final tent after they returned. So this lineup is just to try and get you into the mindset of thinking about the story sort of behind the official legend. So going from left to right, I'm sure everybody really knows this story well, so I'm sorry if I'm telling you a lot of stuff you already know, but from left to right, that is Dr. Edward Wilson, who was a scientist, then Captain Scott, then in the middle, Taff Evans. Do ask me what you think about him being in the middle of this picture. And then Captain Oates, and at the end, Birdie Bowers. So now, instead of seeing those men, I would like you to see behind Dr. Edward Wilson, so that's on the left, a scientist, behind Scott, an artist, behind Taff Evans in the middle, a singer, behind Captain Oates, a lady of the manor, and behind Birdie Bowers, a headmistress. So now, just bear with me, 3rd pass, don't see the men at all. So now, in this lineup, you're going to see a scientist, an artist, a singer, a lady of the manor, and a headmistress. Okay? So now I will try and introduce you to them, just so you've got a fix on who's who. Okay, so this is on the left, this is Dr. Edward Wilson. He was a scientist and an artist, and this is Oriana, his wife. And Oriana, between the two expeditions, so while we can still see the discovery, 3 of these men were on that first expedition with Scott, 1901 to 1904. So 3 of these men were on that boat there when they went to the Antarctic in the first expedition. He was one of them, so he would know that boat very well. And so would Oriana, because they got married just before he left on the first expedition. And in between the 2 expeditions, they were in Fort Augustus, and they were dissecting grouse to try and find out what was happening with the grouse, because they were dying. And they were sponsored by somebody called Lord Lovat. And so Oriana became incredibly good at dissecting grouse and preparing specimens and trying to find out what the problem was, why they were dying. And she prepared a report on a brace of grouse, wrote back to them and said, dissected them, no trace of disease. And she got a reply saying, I should hope so, they were for consumption, not dissection. So you can see she was on a roll with this science thing. And then after Edward Wilson died, an aunt of mine in Alice Springs in Australia, of all places, found a reference to a bat from Katherine in Darwin in northern Australia, and then the end of the reference was the Latin Oriane. And we traced it through, and nobody knew this before, but Oriana became a collector for the Natural History Museum in London after Edward Wilson's death. And she was a very well-respected scientist in her own right, but nobody knew this, because the thing is that the men all kept diaries, and their expedition is detailed and it's recorded for posterity. The women, it's an entirely different kind of way of researching. It's not in the archive. So now we know that she was a scientist in her own right, but just to show you how invisible these women were before I started, this is a picture that was from the Scott Polar Research Museum archives, and the caption was Captain Scott, who's in a boater, and guests, because they didn't know who those people were. But the person in the hat on the left, the big frothy hat, that's Oriana Wilson, and the person beside her is Kathleen Scott, who was the sculptor. So Kathleen Scott, you can see, isn't wearing a corset, isn't wearing tailored clothes, which is how they used to dress. She was very sort of bohemian. And in fact, Scott said to her, I'm terribly sensitive to appearances. You must look as if there isn't any poverty at all. And she said, if you want me to wear a conventional frock, I will, but you can just see what a fright I look. So anyway, so Oriana Wilson was trying to dress very sort of fashionably and carefully. They didn't have very much money, but so that is Oriana, Scott, and Kathleen on the deck, and it just said Captain Scott and guests. So now going one in, that's Captain Scott, one in from the left, and this is not Kathleen Scott. But if you go on Google and you put in Kathleen Scott, this is probably the first image that will come up. And this is what's on display at the Scott Polar Research with Kathleen Scott underneath. Actually, it isn't. So isn't it amazing that the most famous man's wife is so invisible that she is miscaptioned? So this isn't. This is George Wyatt's wife. So you see that chap with the boater? Normally the image is cropped to the one that you see on this side, just the 2 of them, but actually the chap on the boater is her husband. And they're posing with Scott, because he was a sort of celeb. And so, yeah, isn't it amazing? And you can see she's wearing a very tailored dress. James Lees Milne was a friend of Kathleen Scott's, and he said she was the worst dressed person he knew, kind of aggressive, no taste. Whereas this is a well-dressed lady, and she's called Sally Wyatt. So here she's married, but just remember what that chap in the boater looks like. This is Kathleen Scott in her happy place between 2 chaps. She really disliked women. She said, the next time my husband goes on expedition, the wives should be interviewed as well as the men, better still, have none. Her only friend was Isadora Duncan, the contemporary dancer. That was the only person she was prepared to really speak to. But she has a very interesting history, Kathleen, because her mother died shortly after giving birth to her. She was brought up in a kind of convent orphanage where she was obliged to bathe in a shift lest she catch sight of her own naked body. couple of years later, she was in Rodin's studio learning how to be a sculptor. And a naked chap came and jumped up on a throne and struck a pose and struck another pose and then walked out. And she just looked around at all the other students looking at this man normally, and she ran out and was sick in the loo. And she came back and said, I just couldn't cope with nakedness, you know. And then she thought, how vulgar that is, how ridiculous. And from then on, she sculpted naked men. And there are naked men, there are a lot of naked sculptures that she has made. One of them's outside the Scott Polar Research Institute, if you've been there. It's a man going like this. It's a very beautiful sculpture. He was very talented. And it was Lawrence of Arabia's brother. The problem was that he posed for that sculpture, then he became a lecturer at Cambridge, so then he had to bicycle past his naked self on the way to work. But anyway, she was, so on her, with the bowler hat, that's Captain Oates. And he always tried to sort of crunch and try not to be photographed, and he always looked completely dishevelled. And that is Birdie Bowers on this side here, with a nose that gave him the nickname Birdie. And I love it that he's trying not to smile. He's always trying not to smile, because it was just not the done thing to smile in photographs, but his face defaulted to a smile. So it was an effort. Okay, so this is, now we're in the middle, and Taff Evans was the only working class member of this group. And I'm using that term in the way that they would have used it. And the class distinction was very pronounced at that time. So the images we have of Taff are ones taken by the press, because probably they didn't own a camera. They were in, he and his cousin Lois. This is Taff, a newspaper picture of him. And this is Lois, and this was taken of Lois and the three children after Taff died. So the pictures we have of them are taken by newspaper photographers. Lois was a singer. She grew up in a pub called the Ship Inn in Gower, and she often performed, and she became a bit of a celebrity in her sort of local area. She was sung beautifully. And these are her three children. When Taff went to the South Pole the second time with Scott, he was one of the three that went on that boat too. His son, the one on Lois's lap, was a baby. Do ask me about Lois. She is a really, really interesting wife, and what happened to those children is interesting. I only have time really to introduce you to these women, so just ask me anything you would like to afterwards. So now, on the left, just to the side of Taff, you can see he's favouring one leg. This is Captain Oates, handsome chap. And the reason we know anything about Captain Oates is probably because he is a handsome chap. And this lovely lady called Sue Lim had him as her sort of poster boy at school when she was in Cheltenham. And she wrote a letter in the manner of the South Polar Times, which is the sort of newspaper that they made to while away the winter nights when they were in the Antarctic. And so she made this Christmas card in the style of the South Polar Times, and she sent it to Frank Debenham, who was also on this expedition. Frank didn't go on or Deb, he was nicknamed, he didn't go on the South Pole journey because they were playing football. You know, you've seen those pictures of football on the ice. That's the kind of entertainment. He twisted his knee. So he went all the way out there, then twisted his knee playing football, couldn't be chosen. Anyway, so Sue Lim, this schoolgirl in Cheltenham, had him up on a poster in her room, and she wrote this Christmas card to Deb, who had started the Scott Polar Research Institute. She said, Happy Christmas, and from a fan. And Deb wrote back and said, that is the best Christmas card I've ever got. Come over with a couple of your school friends and meet us all. So Sue Lim went over, and Deb, she's a really delightful lady. And Deb said, I'm just going to introduce you to Violet Oates, because Violet Oates, his youngest sister, was still alive. And so he introduced a 16-year-old to an 80-year-old, and until that point, they had said that Oates had never written a diary to the South Pole, that there were no letters, that they'd all been burned, there was nothing to be able to use for biography. And Violet Oates and Sue Lim formed a friendship, and she went forwards and back, and kind of went to tea and things. And then one day, there was, Oates was a paying guest on this expedition. He was very, very rich, and they lived in a huge hall called Guestingthorpe Hall. And Violet Oates had moved out of Guestingthorpe Hall with the big table from the hall, and she was sitting there with Sue once, and she flicked up she said there was a chenille tablecloth along this enormous table, but by then Violet was in a tiny cottage and the table took up the whole room. She flipped up and there were 3 trunks underneath of letters and diaries. And she said to Sue, I'm going to go out for a walk and you can copy anything you like. And so Sue said, it was amazing, she was absolutely amazed and never thought that might happen, that Violet might trust Sue. And so Sue started copying things out, but she was only doing O-levels then, so she copied up the side of her geography GCSE book, and she came away with these notes, and then her mother realised what an amazing thing she'd been shown. So anyway, so Sue said, I wasn't really that interested in diaries and letters, I just fancied it. But anyway, she went ahead and she wrote the biography, which is a brilliant biography. But it's interesting because we would know nothing about this man if he hadn't been Sue's poster boy. So he wasn't married, but if you read the Geographical Journal a couple of years ago, it said Mrs. Oates, Captain Oates' wife. He wasn't married. But if you want to ask me anything about children, do ask me afterwards. But anyway, this is his mother, Caroline Oates, a formidable lady. I said to Sue, how would you feel about meeting her? And she just shivered, literally shivered. So she's formidable, but I think she would have been quite fun as well. The way into this lady is that she kept accounts books, but there's a lot of personality in those accounts. So it says things like, has an amount for the doctor, and then in brackets afterwards it says, not for self. And I was thinking, who are you telling? Are you telling me? Were you thinking somebody was going to write about you one day and we'll be looking through this? Isn't it funny? Who was she writing that for? But anyway, and she had 4 children. Captain Oates was the second, and called Lawrence. And they lived in this enormous great hall, and he was being sort of groomed to be Lord of the Manor. But he didn't want that at all. He wanted to look dishevelled and go off and do stuff with horses. Absolutely loved horses. He was an officer in the Enniskillen Guards. And he was in the Boer War. He was trapped in a ditch at one point, surrounded by Boers. And the Boers thought, this is totally unfair. So they sent in a message saying, surrender, goods and property guaranteed in life. And Captain Oates scribbled back a message saying, we came here to fight, not surrender. So the Boer were very good marksmen, and they decided that they would leave him because it was so ludicrously brave. But as they were leaving, they shot him in the thigh and it broke his femur. So that wound healed, but one of the effects of scurvy is that scar tissue undoes, deteriorates. And so possibly that was why he was favouring one leg in that photograph that I showed you. But it's doctor, not for self, so he never told anybody that his leg was sore. So anyway, he wrote to Caroline Oates that he really disliked, he said, I dislike Captain Scott intensely. And he thought he had a very uneven temper. And if Caroline Oates had read that, or if she'd ever shared it with Scott, he would have been court-martialed, Captain Oates. Instead of that, they were sitting in a tent together. Caroline Oates knew more about what her son was thinking than Captain Oates was in this sleeping bag next door. It's an extraordinary thought, isn't it? And so instead he chose him for the South Pole. So last thing to say about Caroline Oates is that she had a notice up in Guestingthorpe Hall for visitors. This gives you a bit of an insight into her personality, and it said, don't shiver, there was no heating. Don't ask what fish, and don't stay too terribly long, like more than a week. So that was it, you knew where you were with her. Okay, so now on the end, this is Bertie Bowers. And if any of us happen to be stuck in the Antarctic with nothing, not a tent or any food, this is the guy you would want to be with. I think he's an amazing chap. And he comes from Bute, so he's a Scottish, he's your man from Scotland. And he wasn't married either, he was a bachelor, so Oates and Bertie Bowers weren't married. And this is his mum, and she was an amazing lady. This family were ludicrously capable. They were extremely bright. Everyone always underestimated them when they first met them. So when she was a tailor's daughter from Cheltenham. She went to the teacher training college, and her first job, she was made headmistress within a couple of years. So then she, instead of staying safely in England, she went out to Penang in Malaysia. And then she met a merchant seaman and had 3 children, and Birdie was the youngest. But in the Birdie Bowers biography, it says that this picture is Birdie Bowers, his mother and his 2 sisters. But there's nobody with white hair here, as you can see. So this again is how invisible they are. Even the biographers miscaptured the women. So actually, if you see the chap in the middle, that is your boated man from the Kathleen Scott picture. And the person who is misdescribed as Kathleen Scott is 2 in from the right, but not smiling in this picture. But Birdie has decided to stand next to the pretty girl, who is his height, and you can see the chap in the boater at this point, because this is before they left England, they were just engaged, they weren't married. You can see the chap in the boater looking at Birdie. Can't you? What are you doing, mate? Standing next to my fiancé. And Birdie's sisters are the 2 ladies on this side. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a clip. It doesn't have any sound, and it's not in colour, but it is the only moving images of the Snow Widows. And so you're going to see, I will kind of talk you through it. You get 2 passes of this, but you have to really look at it. Okay, you ready? Let me just see if I can do it. Play. Will it play? Okay, right. So this is the tug. This is Cardiff Harbour, and this is the Discovery leaving. Do you see that figurehead? Can you see, if you really look, the right arm is out like this? Okay. So this ship doesn't exist anymore. That one does. This one is on the seafloor off Newfoundland. If you look at the back of the deck, can you see somebody with a very wide hat? You remember I showed you that picture of Kathleen Scott? That's her. And the chap leaning beside is Scott in a boater. So that's the picture, you remember where it said, and guests. And now if you look at the next mast coming past, you see the lady with the hat, that's Oriana. And you can see leaning beside her, that's Edward Wilson. He's trying to get out of the camera shot. You see, you only get it for 3 seconds, that's it. Okay, let's do it again, because I try and put it on twice, because I think everybody needs 2 passes at this. That tug at the front was called the Falcon. So there's your figurehead again. That's the only bit of the Terra Nova that survives, but it's in storage in Cardiff. So if anybody can help me get it out of storage and into a museum, that'd be brilliant. And at the back again, you can see Kathleen Scott. The chap at the front is Teddy Evans. He was captaining the boat out. Very controversial figure. I've 10 characters is enough to deal with, but if you want to ask me about Teddy Evans, I can talk about him. And he is mentioned in the book, him and his wife Hilda. And then you see Oriana. George Seaver, Ted Wilson's biographer, said she moves like a bird, very fast bird-like movements. So it's just amazing for me to see even a little clip of her. Okay, let's try and go on. We don't need it again. Okay, right. So the Terra Nova left Cardiff, and then it sailed around the world, so down under South Africa and Australia, New Zealand, and then goes from New Zealand down. Okay, that shows you where the cables are laid along the seabed. So the British Empire was connected up with these cables, and there was the expedition had an exclusive news arrangement with the Central News Agency. So everything had to go to the Central News Agency first. And since they were in debt already when they went out, they really needed to honour that agreement. So I'll just show you a tiny little bit till they go. This is Kathleen Scott, who said that women were totally useless, but she wanted to be consulted on all expedition affairs. So here she is watching the dogs being mushed on Quail Island, just off New Zealand. And this is the lady I said I wouldn't talk about in the feather boa, but if you ask me, I will. And that's Oriana and Ted. I found this picture in a book in Dunedin in New Zealand, and it's just so lovely to see them laughing because they're caught off guard. So this is the back, which is quite interesting because you were saying about that steeply roped back, and here we are again with the this boat has a very steep, rather like the Discovery. I can tell you where the women are sitting on this if you want, but this is the last time they saw them. So then this ship went out of New Zealand with Kathleen Scott and Hilda and Oriana on it. Oriana is on the far left, sitting with Edward Wilson. They're sitting so closely that she's obscured. You can only really see him. In the middle, you can see Kathleen Scott by the wheel, and you can see a man leaning, talking to somebody off the boat, and that's Captain Scott. So they're miles apart, those two. And then if you look just to the left of the wheel, that is Teddy Evans and Hilda saying goodbye. So then this ship went out, and the wives were then taken off in a tug, and Kathleen Scott deliberately didn't say goodbye to Captain Scott. So the last he saw of her was he was trying to find her to say goodbye, and she was moving away on a tug called the Plucky. And she said, I didn't want to say goodbye to him because I thought he might look sad and he'd lose respect for his man, so she never said goodbye. That was it. This is the boat once it got down to the Antarctic, and so they had to unload supplies, and here they are, you can see they're using sledges and ponies, and the motor sledges, one of them went through the ice, and that will be on the seabed still somewhere. And this is overwintering in the hut, and standing up is Captain Oates with a picture of Napoleon behind him. His absolute total uber hero was Napoleon. He was incredibly dyslexic, and so he'd been reading 2 books on Napoleon for as long as Caroline could remember. Caroline was the person who got him into the army. She was an amazing lady. So then the book starts with it being summer in the northern hemisphere, and then when it's summer, this is Gestingthorpe Hall doing lunch for the villagers, and this is the worst journey in the world. So when it's summer in the north, it's winter in the south. And so this is Birdie and Edward Wilson and absolutely Cherry Garrard about to go off and do the first ever winter journey, which is an amazing thing to have done. This is a sketch that I found. I did an article in New Zealand in the press and said, does anybody have anything from Oriana? Because the only way I was going to get anything about her was letters that had been received from her. And somebody said, I've just been digging in my attic and I found the visitor's book, and she must have stayed with us. And this is, the date is very poignant because she was hoping he would come back at this stage. It was, Anyway, so this is Kathleen Scott, and this is a picture that she sent to be taken back out with the Terra Nova into the Antarctic, because the Terra Nova, instead of being crushed by the sea ice, came back to New Zealand and then went in with resupply in the Antarctic summer, which is our winter. And you can see, this is Kathleen Scott in a sewing costume. This is the equivalent now of sending your husband a picture of you in a string bikini, because it's all, it's pressed against her body. This is Scott in the Antarctic in the hut, and this is how he liked to think of her. But anyway, so I'm going to just quickly read you one bit, because it is, what is the day today? Is it the 10th?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just because this is from the 10th of February, 1913, so today, 1913. When I told you that there was an exclusive news deal as part of the sponsorship, so they had to make sure, even when it had been discovered that Captain Scott and his teammates had died on the way back from the South Pole, they had to make sure that the Times had that news first. So they somehow had to get an exclusive 24 hours to the Times. So they had to send a telegram across the world with the information and then not tell anybody for 24 hours, otherwise they would lose this money. It's amazing. It's an amazing story. It takes up 2 chapters in this book. If you can put the book down then, I haven't done my job, because it is extraordinary. So this is how it starts. Just remember there's that ship out there, so you can kind of think ship thoughts. 10th of February 1913, Oamaru, New Zealand. It is midnight, and in the moonless dark, the Terra Nova lies at anchor off Oamaru Harbour. The men are summoned below decks. Teddy Evans, as second in command, is now in charge, because Scott's been found to have died. He is about to read out the telegram he has composed. The telegram will be sent from Oamaru to the Central News Agency in London in the morning. As the major sponsor, the CNA has exclusive rights to the distribution of expedition news for the first 24 hours. The expedition is in considerable debt. It is in their interest not to jeopardise that contract. As the crew emerge onto the Terra Nova's blacked-out deck, a beam of light sweeps across it. It is the Oamaru lighthouse. The message in Morse code reads, "What ship?" Another beam of light and the Morse question is repeated. Should they respond? At 1:30 a.m, the dark bulk of the Terra Nova slides nearer the land and cuts its engines. A dinghy is lowered on creaking pulleys and 3 men scramble down a rope ladder. One of them takes the oars. The boat moves off, pulling steadily towards the wharf on the south side of the harbour, Sumter Wharf. As they get nearer, a voice demands that they identify themselves. Tying up, 2 men in sea boots climb the wooden ladder to find the night watchman, Neil MacInnes, standing at the top. MacInnes is expecting the arrival of the Negatoru. Who are they? Why have they ignored his signals? He could arrest them. The 2 men are escorted to MacInnes' hut. He telephones the harbour master, Captain James Ramsey, who says he will meet them on Arran Street. Tom Green, who rowed them to the wharf, has returned to the Terra Nova. They can hear the ship's engines start up. It will sail northeast and hide over the horizon, out of sight of land. So they had to keep this message entirely secret. What actually happened then, I mean, you'll have to read it, but they went into the telegram officer's office in the morning, and they gave him a sentence to send to London, and he sent the sentence, and then afterwards they said, "Would you mind if we locked you in your room?" And he agreed. So he was locked in his room, and then they went to the station to be able to get a train to the expedition agent in Christchurch. And instead of going into the station, they stayed in the grass and just jumped on the moving train, so nobody would ask them questions in the station. But once they got onto the train, rumours started. Who are these 2 men in sea boots? They thought maybe one of them was Captain Scott and his friend. So they said to him, "Who are you?" And they said, "Our orders are not to tell anybody." So then the rumour started that Captain Scott had come home. So then was it also Edward Wilson? And at that point, Oriana Wilson was in New Zealand. So she heard a rumour that maybe her husband had come back. And over the 24 hours, the way that this message plays out, bouncing between London and New Zealand, and eventually it was the biggest news flash in the world. You know, eventually it was around the world after 24 hours, but it was an enormous story. Anyway, please do ask me questions now. That's about as much as I can say at speed.
Thank you very much for an incredible talk. I was hanging on every word. I will take the privilege of asking the first question, and then we will open up for audience questions. I would like to ask you a bit more about Lois Evans. You touched on her a little bit. I know from reading a variety of nonfiction polar books, it's just very hard to, there aren't as many primary source documents available about the men, much less their wives. Most of the sources that exist are the officers, so you can go read the officers' diaries. So how did you make her come alive on the page? What sources did you consult to tell Lois Evans' story?
Okay. Yes, Lois Evans was a mystery, but if you remember those 3 children, the youngest one, Ralph, his son, John Evans, is still alive. There's a very big story about the Taff Evans, which you will find in the book, but Lois was his official wife. It's a short way of saying it. So, interesting conversations I've had with John Evans. But the real tragedy of that story is that when they found the 3 bodies in the tent, that was Captain Scott, Dr. Wilson and Birdie Bowers were the 3 last survivors. And so their tent was discovered the following year. They had been 11 miles from One Ton Depot when they died. So when they found that diary, it said, Taff Evans is holding us up, basically, and he seems to have lost his reason. What had happened, he'd fallen into a crevasse, bashed his head, got a hemorrhage, He was an incredibly capable man, very bright, very, very capable. Anyway, so when that diary was published in the newspapers, people in Wales said, well, maybe he was the problem. Maybe it was a class thing. He got bored when he was just sledging along in white. He couldn't reach into the classical library of his mind to entertain himself. It was really awful. Anyway, so eventually those 3 children were bullied in the playground because they said your father was the reason that it happened. And really, really tragically, Taft's mother, Sarah Evans, was approached by a newspaper, and she said, the more I read, the more I think that maybe it was his fault and maybe they should have just left him behind. It's amazing, a mother saying that. So she didn't mean that to have the impact it did, but as a result, until quite recently, in Wales, he was considered to be the problem. So they were badly bullied, really badly bullied, down to the next generation. So John, the one I've met, who's the grandson, so the son of the youngest, one on her lap, he was bullied at school. Isn't that awful? But now they're having an amazing renaissance, and there's probably going to be a film, a biopic about Taft, and it's all going to be great. But at the time, there was a fund. Once the news came out of the deaths, the last thing that Captain Scott wrote, and the pages in this book, is, for God's sake, look after our people. And as a result of that message being published, because it was at the end of a message to the public, so that was published instantly in the newspaper, and there was a huge outpouring of cash. This is quite interesting of how basically the Royal Geographical Society decided to distribute that cash. Kathleen Scott got 8,500, Peter got 3,500. This is in that money terms. And Lois got 1,250. She had 3 children. So she had to be paid weekly, and she had to present her 3 children annually to make sure that they were still alive and she wasn't claiming for a dead child. And they did offer to take the oldest child into an orphanage, but she declined the offer. So it's quite amazing. Isn't that amazing that Peter Scott got 3,500, she got 1,250 for her and 3 children. So it was just a different era, and she was very difficult to research, but she did occasionally write letters to the RGS, and so some of her letters, are in the RGS, so that's most of the way that I've got her. And also there's some recordings by people, because Sarah Evans, Taft's mother, signed her name with a cross. It was just, she was born the wrong side of the Education Act. Lois and Taft, who were cousins, both wrote beautiful copperplate. There's a bit of information. Somebody was recording the Gower dialect, and so most of what I've got about Lois is from her cousins, and it's in sound recordings in the Gower Museum. There we go. Long answer. Any other questions, anybody? Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about your choice to use the present tense when you were writing?
Yes. So the book is written in the present tense. I did try and write it in the past tense, but it just wouldn't be written like that. But the reason it's in the present tense is because I went to see Wayland Kennett. So Kathleen Scott is the only one of those who married again. And she had a son with her second husband called Wayland. And I went to meet him, and it was in Bayswater in London on the top of Hyde Park. And Peter Scott is called Peter after Peter Pan, because Jane and Barry and Captain Scott were really good friends. Very unlikely, a playwright and explorer. But anyway, they were very good friends. And so Kathleen Scott ended up living in Barry's house. And so I went there with Wayland Kennett, who was an elderly man by that stage. He took me into the nursery that Peter Pan blew away in. So it was this amazing sense of kind of time and things standing still and nobody growing up. And anyway, I said to him, what was it like when your mother was in here, using it as a studio? And he said, well, she's standing over there, and this is where her sculpture table is, this is the maquette she's working off, there's a plant here, a lamp here. And it was just happening for him in front of his eyes. It was, obviously, we were there. And it was so spine-tingling, feeling it as if I was absolutely there, that I wanted to try and reproduce that. The other reason is, we can be wise in retrospect about this story. But what was it like when they were making decisions at the time? Those decisions that, you know, without the benefit of hindsight, you know, forget the fact that it was -40 when they were making them, but without the benefit of hindsight, they just didn't know what the weather was going to be like. They didn't have weather forecasts. You know, they didn't have all the information. So I'm trying to put you in the position so you can really look around the scene and think, what would I do if I was here? That's the plan, try and put you there in the moment. Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
Was there a moment when you were writing it where something happened and you thought, yes, it's going to work?
Yes, I think so. It's probably when I realised that this story could be told alternately, so that you can tell what the wife's doing, then you can tell what the man's doing. So once I line the date up, I can find out exactly what the woman and the man are doing at the same time. And that's just so extraordinary, because there is this year that the women live in ignorance, because there's no way of getting the message back that the men have died. Even the men in the Antarctic didn't know that the men returning from the South Pole had died, because they could only go out and try and find them once it was Antarctic summer again. So that year of them living and trying to live bravely. And the amazing thing that I found, this actually was one thing that was in an archive we've both been in, which is an amazing archive, the Scott Polar Research Institute archive. I found that Amundsen, who had beaten Scott to the South Pole, got back within that year, so he got back in 1912. And his first set of lectures were in New Zealand, in Christchurch. And so Oriana, who had gone out early hoping that they would have come back in 1912, was there. And so she had to go, obviously, be a good woman, to these lectures. And so she went, but the New Zealanders had sort of taken sides with the British slightly. And so the slide person either was or was pretending to be drunk. So for the whole of Amundsen's lectures, he was putting wrong slides in, up the wrong way, back to front, oh sorry, absolutely wrecking Amundsen's lectures. And Oriana was sitting in the front of this lecture thinking, I'm supposed to be supporting this man. In the end, neither of them knew by that stage that her husband was dead. In the end, she ended up comforting Amundsen and taking him back to Kinsey's house and saying, no, it wasn't that bad, the lecture, don't worry. And Amundsen sort of felt he needed to say something comforting back to Oriana. So he said, because they did know that the men had done that winter journey, and he said, I have never heard of anybody doing a winter journey. No, these are the Norwegians, these are the real sledges. And he said, if he survived that journey, which we know he did from the news that came back then the South Pole will be walking apart. You'll be fine. So she wasn't just living in ignorance, she was living in the positive hope that he had definitely survived it. So those sort of things, I think then it's going to work when you think, I know something they don't know, and it's just so extraordinary to see both sides of the story. That's what I think. I don't know. Anybody else? Yes?
Yeah. In your research, did you find whether the snow widows' interest in polar exploration died with their men?
Oh, I've never been asked that before. Yes, I'm thinking about it with polar exploration. Kathleen Scott supported Mawson, and also may have had an affair, may not have done, with Nansen. So they still stayed in touch with the polar world, and they still were the sort of go-to people for the Antarctic. But if you think of this date, 1913, the whole world exploded the year later. Nobody could give a damn about polar exploration. Only 5 men died going to the South Pole. Imagine then the devastation of the trenches. But the thing that's really interesting about that is that there is a letter from a chaplain who said, we are playing Ponting's film of Scott in the Antarctic in the trenches, and Captain Oates' example of self-sacrifice is the most motivating thing for these poor officers who have to get up and run over no man's land. You know, theirs was a muddy no man's land. In the Antarctic, it had been a polar no man's land. So there was this sort of equivalence, and it was definitely still right in the minds. Everybody knew the story. Everybody in the world, you know, sort of developed world knew the story. The irony is that when I started doing this book, the Official Secrets Act lasts 100 years. So now some information has come to light about Captain Oates, which I can tell you, but it's mostly in the book, which is that Caroline Oates, the British establishment personified, is actually not who she seems. So that was really fascinating. And she had, both of her sisters had married German men. One of them was in the German army. So in the documents that I found, it says, it's literally Trading with the Enemy as the title. And they were kept in the official secrets because Captain Oates was motivating people to go over the top. Can you imagine what would have happened if instead actually two of his cousins were on the German side? And so Caroline Oates had her sisters were in Germany during that war, and she had to try and send them money. So the only way I know about them is that in her accounts book she has to put kroners. But at this stage, there was a chap called Sir Edgar Speyer who had sponsored the expedition. He also sponsored the proms, the concerts, and he sponsored the tube, the metro service in London. But he was a German banker, and he was hounded out for having a German surname. So if anybody had found that out about Oates before I did, I mean, back then, it would have been an entirely different story for me, and anything that we've ever learned about Oates would have been skewed. It's interesting, isn't it, that these things only come out later. Incredible. But Caroline Oates, when I went into Gestingthorpe Hall, she made a whole wing as a memorial to Captain Oates. And the carving on the front is a line from Chaucer saying, just make sure you never talk, never tell your neighbours, you know, no wagging tongues. And it was just close down, say nothing, you know. That was her sort of message to the family.
Yes. Clearly you've been drawn to this subject because you have an interest in it, and I was wondering, as you were researching and writing about these people, the men and the women, did your attitudes to them change and develop in the way it surprised you, or?
I think it did. I never feel I do Emily Bowers justice in this talk. She was a truly amazing lady, and yes, finding out about her and what it must have been like to go out to Penang and have 3 children. She was involved in at that point, it was really raw. It was an amazing place to live and work. So yeah, I think she is incredible. The other thing is interesting with the friendships between the women. So one of the things that I say in this book, which hasn't ever been said before, but Sue Lim told me it. And I used to be a journalist, so she told me, and I thought, I could say to her, do you mind if I publish that? And then I thought, no, I'm just not even going to say it. And then about a year later, she said, I did tell you that thing, didn't I? And I said, but you never said it in your book, so why do you want me to? Anyway, she said, I think it needs to be said. So right at the end of Caroline's life, Caroline Oates was going around the Scott Polar Research Institute. Frank Debenham was showing her around. And there's lots more to say about the build-up to this situation. But by the end of it, Caroline Oates walked out of the Scott Polar Research and she pointed to a medallion which has got Scott's bust head. And she said, that man killed my son. Sue Lim never said that. It's a kind of extraordinary situation, isn't it? You know, it makes you think of the whole story backwards differently, slants it totally differently. But Emily Bowers, who Birdie was the youngest in his late 20s, she never regretted it. She said he wanted to go, he wanted to be with you, you had an incredible time, and that's how God decided to play it. She was very religious. But interestingly, even with those two absolutely opposite points of view, Caroline Oates and Birdie and Emily Bowers were friends till the end of their life. They used to go on holiday together and support each other like crazy. When somebody said, well, the problem is that Birdie Bowers got the stores wrong, Caroline Oates said, from what I know about Birdie Bowers, that certainly wouldn't have been because of meticulous. And I thought, but you never even knew him. She's only supporting him because she's supporting Emily. So it's really interesting reading these letters about the sort of support. And interestingly, Kathleen Scott and Oriana Wilson had no time for each other, but straight after the tragedy, they were best mates for about 3 years. And then there was another tragedy. A mutual friend of theirs, the publisher, Scott's Diary publisher, jumped out of a window and committed suicide. And at that funeral, Kathleen Scott couldn't bear anybody to be sad. She thought it was a contamination. And so she was all jolly at this funeral, and Oriana Wilson really wasn't, and was also losing her Christian faith at the time. And Kathleen Scott in her diary wrote, "She's just an absurd prig." Never talk to her again. Never talk to her again, except, this is a weird thing, maybe, I don't know if you want to end on this coincidence, but I was trying to get a book on Edward Wilson, because there are several brilliant ones by George Seaver, and one of them is Edward Wilson, Nature Lover. And so I put it into something, hopefully not Amazon, but maybe Amazon at the time, because it's about 10 years ago. And the copy that came to me, of the thousands that could have come, was signed by Kathleen Scott. And I know it's Kathleen Scott because I know that writing really well from the archives and from her diary, because she's the only one who did keep a diary. And it said, to my niece, you know, this is an amazing man, and love, Kathleen Scott. So then I know that her and Oriana Wilson must have had an understanding. They must have had some kind of friendship, because she wouldn't have bought that book and, you know, made that kind of comment. So it wasn't absolutely terminal, their falling out, but she just couldn't bear women. She absolutely couldn't bear them. Anybody else? Or is that sort of covered? Oh, yeah.
Just out of curiosity, obviously it's such a tragedy with everything that's happened, but has there ever been any documented evidence from both the women and the men that have ever doubted the expedition?
That they doubted the expedition?
Yes.
So yes, the men, Captain Oates thought that it was chaos. So he said, if you're going to make a land campaign, he's a naval man, Captain Scott, and he's making a land campaign using ponies, men, and machines, these motor sledges. And so he said, it's chaos. There is a very famous picture of, have I got it? I don't know if I have, let's just see. Which way am I going? Am I going the right way? This is the funeral. Can you see the streets are completely packed for the memorial service? Kathleen Scott didn't know that Scott had died at this memorial service, because she was on a boat on the way out to New Zealand and they couldn't get to her. Isn't it incredible? This is, yes. Okay, so the picture, this is a hut. So, yes, he said that he needs to buy the penny book on transport. At that point, Scott walked out of the hut, and then the chap next to him, called Cecil Mears, said, yes, I think he needs to buy the penny book on transport. Scott heard that, and that's probably why Mears wasn't selected for the South Pole, Captain Oates was. So there were people that doubted it. Everybody kept completely quiet at the time, but if you got caught even saying that, that was enough to get you struck off. So I think there was a lot of doubt. But anyway, this hut is, there was a hut in, let me see if I can show you it. Yes, this is a hut that was taken for the meteorologists, and it's a flat pack hut from Norwich. Bolton and Paul made it, and Captain Scott ordered it to be taken out on the Terra to be put up for the meteorologists. But when they got there, they thought, no, we don't need it, we'll just all bunk up in one hut because we haven't got much coal, we need to be able to heat just one hut. Anyway, so they didn't even unpack it, they just sent it back to New Zealand. And Joseph Kinsey got this hut, dragged it up the hill, and put it up and said to Oriana Wilson, right, you can live in that hut because you have to live here for a year. And she was delighted, she'd never had her own home. So here she is, being all house proud. She's on the top with the white hat on with Mrs. Kinsey. And so this is in New Zealand. And I went out to New Zealand during the earthquake, and I just wondered if it had survived. And it was teetering on the edge of this cliff, and they were going to bulldoze it. And I wrote to, actually, the Minister for Housing in New Zealand and said, this is a really important hut. And he said, I'm trying to rehome people, and you're asking me to save a shed. I said, but it's a really important hut because it's a symbol for me of resilience. You know, it's a sort of memorial to the snow widows. And so they scooped it up, and they took it up the coast and they have restored it, and you can go and visit this. So this is the sort of memorial to the snowbirds, I think of it like that. Okay? There's one tiny little thing which you have to do for me, which is, this is me for scale, with the Terra Nova figurehead. And this is so here we have the whole Discovery ship, which definitely needs to have some money because it is such an amazing piece of history, isn't it? And the boards at the back are rotting, and it needs, like the fan, the Norwegian equivalent, has a shed over the top of it. But this is all that remains of the Terra Nova, which is the ship that they went out on for that expedition. And you remember I showed you in that video that the hand was out, so the right arm, I kind of think, the women, the right arm was broken off and now it's across. But that was rolled out in storage, so I saw that in an office. It was just rolled out on casters next to me. So none of the Terra Nova is on display. That is in bubble wrap on the third shelf in a shed at the back of some suburb of Cardiff. So if anybody fancies writing to the Cardiff Museum and saying, it would be great to have it out, that would be brilliant. Okay, there we go. Well done. Thank you very much.